All right, looks like we are on and ready to go. If you are with us this evening and you need a book, please raise your hand high. And Bob is standing in the back just ready to rush to your aid and bring you a workbook. Hey, there you go. One customer. Very good. All right, we're going to be on page number 4 in our workbook this evening. Page number 4. We're in lesson number 1, just starting our study, the wilderness journey, a study in Leviticus and Numbers. And so Ulysses and I will be teaching together tonight, and then I'm going to disappear for just a little while, and Ulysses is going to have to carry the water here by himself. So be nice to him, and then he may have to disappear and go preach somewhere, and maybe I'll have to carry it by myself. But Don and I are taking a little trip, so be patient with us while I disappear for just a little while. I promise to come back. All right, well, before we get started, we're going to have a word of prayer. Brother Hodge is going to lead us in prayer.
Lord, you are so good to us, and you are faithful. You are faithful to the children of Israel, so shall you be faithful to us, your spiritual Israel. Father, we stand in awe of your love tonight, and we are so thankful that we can gather uninhibited and study your word together. Father, may we take a deep look at your children of the past, learn from their mistakes, and strive to be ever more faithful. We thank you for your word, for it truly is life. And it teaches us so much about who you are and who we are. Father, have compassion on us all when we fail you. And may we always look to Jesus, who shall forever atone for our sins. It is in his name that we offer up our prayer to you this evening. Amen.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, you want to start?
Yeah, we could. We were on, as we mentioned, on page number 4 in our lesson book. We were going through the questions, and I don't know if we mentioned Sunday, but if you notice the way the lesson book is laid out, instead of just going chronologically through the book of Leviticus, we are dealing with sections. Like this first lesson talks about the 2 narratives. Then we have deal with priests. We deal with priests separately. Then we deal with the sacrifices but sacrifices, priests, then the festivals and feasts, and so on. So as we go through, we will take those passages that deal with those things and talk about it. But this first lesson we're looking at these 2 narratives. The first narrative that we're looking at, the one involving Nadab and Abihu. And we were looking at that Sunday. We were dealing with some of the questions, and we had looked at question number 8. And of course, we know what happened. Nadab and Abihu had gone into the tabernacle, and as the passage, verse 1 tells us, that they each took their censer and put fire in it, and they offered profane fire before the Lord. And we know what happened. Fire came out from the Lord and devoured them. And now they're having to deal with this. And some of the questions that's going to come up in this, as we continue through this, it's going to have to do with how they dealt with it and why certain things were. So question number 9, we just start right out there. And it kind of brings in another possibility into this thing. It says, considering the flow of the narrative based on Leviticus chapter 10, verses 8 through 11, what seemed to have caused this lapse in Nadab and Abihu that brought judgment upon them? How did you answer that? Yes. Yeah. Possibly. Am I sounding too loud to anybody? Just my own ears? Okay. Okay.
I always think I'm loud too, and I probably am.
Yeah. Well, I think the thought behind this question is that perhaps there was a possibility of them having been intoxicated to some degree, which caused a lapse in their judgment in making proper decision and what to do. Now, notice verse 9 and 10, what the writer did say, what the Lord did say. That do not drink wine or intoxicating drink, you nor your sons with you, when you go into the tabernacle of meeting, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generation. Now notice verse 10, that you may distinguish between the holy and the unholy, between the unclean and the clean. So being able to make this distinction, make a proper judgment. Perhaps they had been drinking. Perhaps they were a little under, their judgment was a little impaired when they went to do it. I don't think that's all of it, but that could be a part of what the situation may have been with them. Any thoughts, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we know what happened, right? They offered that strange fire before the Lord, and they were struck dead for that. We talked a little bit Sunday about what that strange fire might have been, and the fact that they were burning that fire upon the incense, the altar of incense inside the holy place of the temple. And of course, they weren't supposed to be doing that. That was supposed to be Aaron. But something caused them to have this lapse in judgment and to not do something according to God's will. Now, was it the fact that maybe they had been drinking and had some strong drink? Maybe it was. I'm not sure if that's exactly it. It could be. It's certainly in the flow. If that's not it, it certainly is put in a strange place in this flow of the narrative, right? This particular comment. And at least we do know that the very next thing, what they're told in verse 9 is, it instructs Aaron and his sons not to partake of such. And so in the flow, I think it could be concluded that indeed it might have been a factor in what happened to them.
Yeah, it could be because of the way it is a part of this, the flow of the discussion as the Lord spoke to Moses about this.
You know, let me ask a question. Do you think it would have made any difference? Do you think they were struck dead if we bring this into it, that this wine and strong drink was part of what caused them to do this? Is that the reason God struck them dead? Okay, because there was a specific thing they should have done. They didn't follow God's instruction. And so while they might not have been struck dead because of this, if indeed this was a factor, was this a factor in them being struck dead? Yeah. And I think that's the point. I think we need to recognize that in our own lives when we talk about being under the influence of whether it be alcohol or drugs or anything of the sort. That we could discuss all day long and have these discussions, as David did a few weeks ago, talking about the social drinking and is it a sin in the Bible. We can have those discussions all day long. In the end, if it impairs our judgment and it causes us to sin, well, forget that first discussion, right? It's very easy to see that it has led us or been a factor in us being unfaithful before the Lord, and we don't want any part of being unfaithful to the Lord. Yes, sir. It wasn't the Lord's command. That's absolutely true. They were violating the will of God. Yes, sir. Yeah, that certainly is a problem in our lives, isn't it? Trying to do things our way and not God's way. Is that you or me?
I think it was me.
Okay.
I think that is part of the thing that most of us have to be mindful of, is that we want to, we like the ideal of innovation. We like to add some things. Some things seem good. Improvement. Everyone likes to improve upon things. We've been doing this the same way for all these years. Let's do something different. Let's do something a little better. Let's improve. Let's innovate. The problem is, anytime that type of thing go against what God has specifically already said, that's the problem. And the main problem here is God had already laid down specifics that they went against. Now, the thing about the alcohol, maybe that could have been a part of the thing that made them not so alert to what they were doing or not. But it also seems to indicate here God was putting a specific standard for the priest that may not have been on the same level for everybody else. The way he said it in verse 9, do not drink intoxicated drink, you nor your sons with you, that when you go into the tabernacle of meeting, that you die. So, especially while they were in the process of doing the services of the tabernacle, there were certain very strict conditions for them. They had to abide by. Yes, I think so.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the problem. They weren't following the law according to the statute of Moses. What had been given them to do and instructed them to do, that's exactly what they did. Whatever the influence was, the violation of the law caused them to be struck. No. So we're getting a little slow. Ulysses, you got to remember, you got to speed me up. Somebody's got to speed me up here, right? And we got to keep moving through this. And listen, we're about to hit the hard part of this lesson. Did anybody else struggle a little bit with this next part? Well, just question 10 through this whole eating of this sacrifice. It took me a few times of reading through, I think, to really get through this a little bit.
Well, let's jump to verse 10. Let kind of start us. Okay. How did you answer question number 10? What did Moses remind his brother and nephew about Leviticus 10? Right. They would continue the process that has already begun. Yes, he did remind them that they would be there were certain ways, certain places give this sacrifice. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think there was a specific. It seemed like they might have been in the process of a specific sacrifice that was going on here, and they had not continued in this case to, as we'll kind of get to, but had not continued on with this offering or this process that would have been according to the law. I got to tell you, I had to read through this like 2 or 3 times before I really felt like I started to understand exactly what happened through this section. But certainly that's what in the first few verses there here, that is what he's telling them, is that they need to continue on because they were supposed to eat of a certain meat. And that's how the priests, of course, got their sustenance. They didn't have land to raise cattle or food, but they would get their sustenance to a portion.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
And the part of the significance of them eating is also was that they were spared of those when people of Israel brought these offerings. The priests partaking of this was a part of them bearing that iniquity. This was a part of what they would do. Now, if you back up, we won't take time to do it, but if you back up, read through chapter 9, it goes through a series of various sacrifices that they were already in the process of doing. They were doing that. This we don't know what the time frame was, but they had already offered certain sacrifices. They were in the process of doing these things when this situation happened. They thereby died. But they caused some other things to happen too, which brought up some other discussion. So, question number 11 about what was Moses angry in Leviticus 10:6. How did you answer that? Moses angry about did not eat the sin off. Yep. But I don't know if we could say that the blood was still in it, but the blood had not been brought into the tabernacle. One of the specific things was that they were to eat of the sacrifice But on the sin sacrifice, if the blood had been brought into the tabernacle, then they would not eat of it. It was burned. So if a sacrifice was made and the blood had not, in the carrying out of that sacrifice, the blood was not taken into the tabernacle, then they were to eat that animal. They would eat that in a clean place, in the place that God had designated. If the blood, however, had been brought into the tabernacle to be offered on the altar, then they were not to eat that. It was to burn. That was the difference in the blood thing. But in this situation, he was angry with them because they did not eat. And Moses specified of the fact that the blood had not been brought in. When he said blood had not been brought in, therefore you should have eaten. But that's what the command was. If the blood is not brought in, eat it, because that's the part of them bearing iniquity. And if they don't do it, they are failing.
Yeah. And I think you've touched on both questions 12 and 13, Linda, and
Right.
what you said there. I think you're exactly right. Is that no, it's fine. No, because we need to, that's good. I think you've touched on exactly that. Is that as we go through, Moses is fearful. He's upset because he's fearful that now they're violating now the will of God. And look, anybody else wish they lived under these complicated set of rules? I mean, listen, we think we have it hard today. Look at what these guys had to remember. And so here they are. Moses is fearful now that they've stopped the sacrifice and that now he's going to be dragging Aaron and these other two boys maybe out because God's going to consume them. And so you're right. It does kind of stop them in their tracks a little bit. And you kind of get the thought here is that, look, first of all, Aaron's sons have died, and then he's told he can't mourn. And we know why, because as a priest, he wasn't allowed to mourn. So he's not allowed to mourn. And now here he's in this situation. You think, well, he just can't continue. He doesn't want to eat the meat. He doesn't want to continue here because he's all upset over this. Well, as we go on, we learn a little bit more. Aaron gives his excuse. Question 13, he gives that defense back to Moses. And what does he say? Why didn't he eat it? That's part of it. But I think there's something else there.
But,
Say that again.
I don't think that was the point. That his question was not concerning the son. As he made his defense to Moses, his question was, if I had eaten it, would it have been acceptable to the Lord? In this situation. And I was trying not to say too much on this because it was going to lead us to a couple of questions coming down. But the comments that Linda was making, I think, kind of leans to the answer of question 12 in particular. Considering the account just happened, what do you think Moses feared? And Greg, I think, already answered that. Moses was afraid that God's judgment was going to come down because they had, again, see, what happened in Nadab and Abihu, they deviated from what God had specifically laid down. And now here's another deviation. And his fear is this deviation is going to take these other two sons. It's going to cause God's judgment to come down again. So that was Moses' fear. And his anger was because, hey, you guys know what you're supposed to be doing. Why didn't you do this? We like that sometimes. Even when we talk to our children, we know we have told them certain things. They don't do it. It's not like we're going to beat them up or anything, but we're upset. Why didn't you do what I told you to do? Type of thing. Yeah. Yeah, that may have been. But yeah, I think in Moses' case, that would be all a part of the package of his concern that God's commandment be carried out the way God gave it. Because that was the problem with Nadab and Abihu. They didn't follow the plan. This happened. Now, this is another deviation in Moses' his fear of judgment. So, but one of the things I noticed is that verse 16 said Moses made careful inquiry, and he noticed the goat had burned up. But his complaint, it says, he was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, the sons of Aaron, and his complaint was with them. He said to them, "Why didn't you eat this? Because this was a part of your due. This is what your responsibility is." But the response didn't come from those two boys. The response came from Aaron. Why do you think that was? Right. So why didn't Moses confront Aaron? Hey man, you top dog here. You're supposed to know what's going on. Why didn't you do this? But he didn't speak to them. He spoke to the son. One of the commentators that I was looking at made a suggestion that the reason Moses didn't speak directly to Aaron because Aaron was high priest, and he did not want to show any disrespect to he who was God's anointed high priest. So he went to the board. But Aaron took responsibility of what had happened there, and his response brings in another question and concern that I labored with for a little while myself as well. Question 13 talked about what was Aaron's defense that satisfied Moses. So how would you answer? Why was Moses, since Moses was angry about this, and Moses feared the judgment of God coming down because this was indeed a deviation from what had been prescribed. So what is it about Aaron's response that made Moses hold his peace? What do you think about, when Aaron said what he said to Moses, Moses held his peace. So he said, what verse 20 says, with that Moses was content. Why? Why do you think Moses was content following Aaron coming? Well, the sin offering and burnt offering was to be offered. That was part of the scripture. But one of those offerings were supposed to have been eaten. That was the deviation. And they didn't eat it. That's why Moses was upset. So if a deviation from God's prescription caused Nadab and Abihu to lose their lives, why did this deviation not cause someone to lose their life? It was indeed a deviation.
Here's a hand right over here.
Okay, it would not.
I don't know that it wouldn't have been accepted. I believe he feared it wouldn't have been accepted. That's at least what I understood. Kind of my take on this as I looked through this was this thought that here these things had happened. Maybe Aaron felt some responsibility as high priest. I'm not sure. Certainly the boys suffered for their actions. And now the way I understood it is that now Aaron is just saying to Moses, I just didn't feel worthy. This offering was for the sin of the people. And based on what's happened today, I'm not sure, I didn't feel that I was worthy in this moment to bear the sin of the people in this way.
Right.
That's what I thought he was saying.
I think that gets to the point because although God had given instructions for Aaron and his sons not to mourn, they were not to uncover their head, they were not to go outside of the tabernacle. Part of them having received the anointing, they could not go near a body and that type of dead body. Nevertheless, they're still human. They still have emotion. These were his boys. These was his sons who he had raised from babies and up to adulthood. There is no way to deny that he had feelings, he had emotions, he had some ties. And my thinking is, Aaron, kind of what Greg was saying. Aaron saying to Moses, "Do you think the Lord would be pleased with me eating?" Because eating had to do with feasting, had to do with enjoyment, had to do with that type of thing. I could not have that frame of mind and eat this to adequately bear the sins of the people with me bearing so much grief. When he said, the way he answered this, he said, let me back up, make sure I read. He said, "Look, this day they have offered their sin offerings and their burnt offerings for the Lord, and such things have befallen me." Now, this idea of when he talked about these such things have befallen me, first of all, he's answering for his son. The son's already done this. The son have done their, they've offered these types. Such things have befallen me. My boys are dead. Do you think God would receive a festive eating of this sacrifice, bearing the sins of the people? My heart cannot, because I am so broken. Now, we cannot get around the fact that this is a deviation. God did try to say with this, but my thought was this. My mind went back to Exodus chapter 34, when Moses wanted to know about God. Let me just flash back there. I don't want to take too much time, but I just want to go back real quick. But Moses wanted to understand God. So God was going to show Moses who he is, but he gave a description of himself to Moses. And when I read this, I'm thinking that's a part of God's nature which comes into play here involving Aaron. Verse 6, this is Exodus 34, verse 6, beginning at verse 6. It says, "And the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abounding in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children." The main point out of that passage that struck my attention is how God describes himself as merciful and gracious, long-suffering, abounding in goodness and truth. And now here he is, the great God of the universe. He has created man. He knows man's inner workings, and he sees Aaron, a father who has lost his son, grieving, and his grace and his mercy steps back. Does that make any sense? Because of his grace, because of his mercy, he steps back. So even though this is a deviation, mercy comes to play. Does that make sense?
I think the humility, yeah, and maybe that's the reason. Again, as you said, there was still a deviation. I think they didn't do what they were supposed to do.
Right.
However, yeah, God's mercy may have come upon them, as opposed to these boys who did their own will, as opposed to thinking with humility and being humble. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of where I was thinking. We got a couple of hands, one here and then one back. Well, it could be looked at that way as part of his mourning, or it could just be disappointment in yourself. I mean, have you ever had a moment where you felt maybe you weren't worthy of something due to something you've done? I mean, we are to partake of the Lord's Supper in a worthy manner. Some week, sometimes, maybe we aren't as worthy as others, right? But certainly we're supposed to do that in a worthy manner. I think it can be tied to that. but I almost separate that emotion and being less that he's mourning, because I think if it had been mourning, I'm not so sure that God would have accepted that thought if it was more from a place of mourning. I felt anyway, as I read through it, that it was more from a place of unworthiness based on kind of the contents of the day and the heaviness. I guess it's somewhat tied. I'm going to say heaviness of heart. But certainly he wasn't out mourning like the people were with the body. Another hand. Well, what happened? What it was, as you said earlier, if the blood was drained outside and it came in without blood, they were to eat it. Is that correct?
Mhm.
But if the blood was brought into the holy place, then the blood was to be burned. I believe, if I'm correct, on the altar of incense. Then the blood was there, sprinkled on the blood of the
Yes.
sprinkled there, and then they were not to eat the meat. So they may or may not have, but the way that they did it, they should have eaten the meat. Well, we would have to go back and look at. I'm sure we could find that reference, and maybe we will. Again, I'd have to go back and look at that reference. But that would have been in the law. That order of how things would have happened and that they were to eat. It was part of the law. I mean, it's not. Today, if we're hungry, we eat. If we're not hungry, we don't eat. This was part of worship and God planning for their sustenance, but also part of their worship and obedience to God. It would have been required. Like I said, much different than the way we think today, but it was law. We'd have to find that reference, and I don't know it off the top of my head.
Well,
Verse 18, is that what you're saying? Verse 18 says as much. Yeah, behold, its blood was not brought, into the inner part of the sanctuary. You certainly ought to have eaten it in the sanctuary as I commanded. So it would have been part of the command earlier. And as I commanded, I'm betting if I look in my reference, I would find that passage.
let me just make this point, then we can move on. When Moses spoke to Aaron and his son in chapter 10, verse 6, that Moses said to Aaron and to Eleazar and Ithamar his sons, do not uncover your head, do not tear your clothes, lest you die. The wrath come upon you and all the people, but let your brethren in the house bewail the burning, Lord. When I read that, I don't see in that passage that God forbidding Aaron to mourn in his heart, in his spirit, in his mind. He was forbidden to do certain things because he had the anointing on him. He was in the tabernacle. He was wearing the holy clothing, that was made. And the custom was to tear your clothes and uncover your head. No, he had the holy things on him. He could not tear that. Can't remove the holy headdress that he had from his head, which had the holiness unto the Lord plaque, all of these things. That was the holy things that were on him, on his body. He could not tear those things. So there were certain things he was not to do. God did not command him that he could feel. And that's the attitude of his heart, I'm thinking, his grief forbade him to be able to keep that at that time.
Mourning had very specific action in the Old
Right.
Testament. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Well, even today, we may be tempted for sin, right?
One right.
That's true, but I really think he's saying here his reason for not eating, I think, comes down to the fact that he didn't feel worthy. His fear of not being worthy of bearing the sin sacrifice. I think we got to see that in verse.
Right. I
And
think
that's really the question
part
that
of it.
answers 16 as well. Question 16, but I think that's the case. By the way, Leviticus 6:26, that was the command for them to eat. That's the reference.
one thing I just want to mention. It was in the case of Aaron, not that it was not a willful neglect. There was specific reason for that God accepted. We've already answered, I think, verse 14. Question 14, why did Moses claim they were supposed to sacrifice according to Leviticus 10? Because it was given to them. I think probably mentioned. I think that's what Greg referred to just a moment ago.
I was wondering if we didn't have anything specific. We've kind of hit this pretty hard. I was wondering if there was anything specific we needed to cover in these last few questions, or if we could move on to page 5, if there was anything specific you wanted to cover.
Does anyone have any questions of your own of things discussed along the question? Question.
One over here. Yeah, back on the previous page, Leviticus chapter 21, verses 10 through 12. That's question number 7 in your material. It specifically lays out the law according to the mourning rights of the priest, of the high priest and the priest. They weren't allowed to go out and to be near the dead body, and they were not allowed to do certain things. So this wasn't necessarily just in reference to his own sons. This was the general instruction and law of God for the priest in this case. And so I believe Ulysses is right in that there were specific actions that they were not allowed to take. It's not to mean that he's not going to be sad that his sons had died. He just, I was thinking, it's a lot like, Max has to stand up and do a funeral. Well, listen, he can't, all the family in the front was crying. I've sang in, I don't know, hundreds of funerals. Everybody's crying. You don't get to do that. You got a job to do, right? You got a task to do. And so you've got to carry that out, right? And Max has to get up and preach a funeral. And I think here these priests had a task. They had something given by God that through these times they had to be solid. They had to be God's example and God's leaders. And so I think that they had certain requirements put upon them. That's what I think. That's the way I relate. Okay, very good. Was there another one before we move along? All right, let's get to page 5. Let's at least pretend we're going to get to page 5 before we end tonight. How about that? The blaspheming the name. So what's happened here, Leviticus? We've jumped 14 chapters to Leviticus chapter 24. We've done that because that's the other narrative here in Leviticus 24. And what happened here in Leviticus 24? What is the sin that this son commits? He blasphemed the name of the Lord, didn't he? Leviticus 24, verse 10 and 11. Now an Israelite woman's son, whose father was an Egyptian, went out among the people of Israel, and the Israelite woman's son and a man of Israel fought in the camp, and the Israelite woman's son blasphemed the name of the Lord and cursed. And then they brought him to Moses. So yeah, his sin was he blasphemed the name of God, and he cursed. We would have no teenagers left today, would we? It is true, isn't it? You think about this. Walk down the hall of a high school, blaspheme the name of God, cursed. He's going to be killed for that. Yeah, I can see myself teaching this lesson in a Devo pretty soon. Seriously. Yeah, not just teenagers. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
When I thought about this, my imagination kind of just went a little bit, thinking about what this cursing might be like. When we think about cursing on the average here, we think of certain words, certain profane words someone might say. My picture here, these guys are fighting. Now, this guy is an Israelite. Of course, he mentions that he's the son of a Egyptian and a Jewish. And he makes that particular point. We look at him in. So I'm thinking, in the course of their talking, he says something like, I don't want to say what might. Anyway, he makes a specific reference to God. in a defaming way. Not just that he say a word, a profane word, but I'm picturing him making a specific reference to Jehovah in a defaming way. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? I'm
A lot of us can imagine that, right? Because we probably hear that on a daily basis, something similar to that now. Would you
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that, or you think it's something different?
like someone talk about your mom. Say you don't say nothing bad about my mama. You might hear that. Well, they said something bad about the God was very specific in naming God, which is why I think it became so. It's more than just a word; it was a reference, specific reference. What I'm thinking. But we won't have time to go much deeper into this. They just give signal. We'll have to pick it up Sunday. Have final comment?
Right. Yeah, the name of God is just thrown around flippantly, and then and maybe, yeah, it said this blaspheming of God and cursing. Maybe those were kind of certainly related or two different things there, but just flippantly using the name of God, maybe, but then also just talking negative and bad against God, I believe would have been. So, yep, let's pick this up, or we'll pick this up on Sunday morning. We're going to have to pick up the pace so that we can get through all this material. Currently, it looks like we got about 25 pages too much in our material. So we'll try to go a little bit faster as we get through stuff. Thank you for your attention and your comments. Just so many good comments and questions tonight. Thank you.
Very much.